Good morning or good afternoon, depending on which part of Canada or the US you're joining us from. I'm Carolyn Lane, Chief Operating Officer of REALPAC, and I'd like to welcome you to the results presentation for the 2022 Global Real Estate Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Survey. So I'd like to begin our webinar by acknowledging that REALPAC's office in Toronto, Ontario, Canada, is covered by Treaty 13, signed with the Mississaugas of the Credit. The office is located on the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Chippewa, Haudenosaunee, and Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse nations, Inuit and Métis peoples, as part of an intricate nationhood that reaches across Turtle Island. So 2022 marked the second year of our global DEI survey, which tracks corporate practices and employee demographics related to DEI in Asia, Europe, and North America, and it's specific to the commercial real estate industry. The survey is produced in partnership with several industry associations. NREV in Asia, INREV in Europe, NAREIM, NCREIF, PREA, and ULI in the United States, and REALPAC in Canada. And it's all brought together in terms of survey design and analysis by Ferguson Partners in Chicago. So for the next hour, Deanna Johnson-Salas and Lindsay Wilhusen of Ferguson Partners will walk us through the key findings of the survey and answer your questions. Deanna is Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at Ferguson Partners, and Lindsay is Director and Head of the firm's survey practice. And both women are leaders in their respective fields. But before I turn it over to Deanna and Lindsay, I'd like to mention a few housekeeping items. During the presentation, if you're on mute, that's a good thing. That being said, this is an interactive webinar, and questions are encouraged throughout the presentation. You don't have to wait till the end. If you have a question, use the raise hand feature on Zoom. So to raise your hand, click more, that's the 3 circles at the bottom of the screen, then select reactions, and then click raise hand located below the other emoticons. You can also type your question into the chat, and a member of our team will call your name. And at that point, you can unmute and ask your question. Lastly, we encourage you to keep your cameras on so that Deanna, Lindsay, and all the other participants can see your lovely faces. Deanna, Lindsay, thank you in advance, and over to you.
Wonderful, thank you, Carolyn. And thank you for joining us today. We'd like to say a huge thank you to all the firms that participated in the 2022 Global Real Estate Survey and to all our partnering associations for collaborating on this important benchmarking tool. As Carolyn mentioned, I am Lindsay Wilhusen, Survey Director here at Ferguson, joined by my colleague Deanna Johnson-Salas, who heads our survey practice, or our DEI practice, and we'll be walking you through some of the key survey findings today. So the survey, which originally started in 2017 as a supplement to the North American Compensation Survey for real estate investment managers, expanded in 2021 to include Asia Pacific and Europe, as well as a cross-section of the CRE industry. The global survey, which is now in its 2nd year, as Carolyn mentioned, has grown to provide reasonable breakdowns of gender, race, and ethnicity across seniority, job functions, and across the entire commercial real estate industry. This survey is a critical tool for understanding where we are today, and it gives us a benchmark to track progress and drive change. As with any survey, it is ever evolving. We do need your help to keep improving and helping us expand it as we go forward. So with that, I ask that you get involved with your associations to not only improve the survey, but to help us improve DEI as an issue across our industry more broadly. So as Carolyn mentioned, this is an open Zoom meeting. We encourage that you ask questions throughout using that chat functionality. And Deanna and I will be highlighting some of the key takeaways on about 10 or so slides today, leaving time at the end for questions and answers. And we will also be sending out a copy of the presentation to everyone that attended today's call. So before we dive into the results, a couple quick notes about the methodology and the data. As we discussed, this is a global survey in partnership with NREV, INREV, NAREIM, NCREIF, PREA, REALPAC, ULI, and Ferguson, with the goal of developing a unified standard for DEI data and best practices in the industry. This is the second year conducting the global survey, which launched in the summer of 2022, collecting data from July through October with the results presented in December. The survey attracted responses from 210 firms, representing over 350,000 full-time employees and over 2 trillion of assets under management. Now, of those 210 responses, 171 were from platforms in North America. And as we get into the later portion of the presentation today, we'll dive into some of the North American demographic data in particular. It's also interesting to point out that we had a 20% increase in participation this year, which I think really speaks to the importance of the topic in the industry. I also wanted to make note that this survey was fielded at the enterprise level. So all the responses were collected at the corporate level for all the programs and initiatives that companies have in place, as well as the demographic data. So that demographic data, in many cases, was based upon how employees have self-identified. So we didn't collect anything from individuals specifically in regard to this survey. And lastly, the full report itself provides a lot of wonderful in-depth view of DEI metrics relating to DEI program, structure, resources, and ownership. We talk about policies and initiatives focused on recruitment, retention and promotion, training and development, tracking and accountability, inclusivity, and pay equity, with further insights by region, number of full-time employees, and assets under management. And lastly, we provide employee demographics by gender, race, ethnicity, as well as hiring, promotion, and departure trends year over year. So let's take a look at who participated. In terms of participant demographics, as you can see on the chart on the left, we have a heavy orientation by design towards kind of the real estate, private equity, investment management industry. So about 57% came out of that sector, followed by REITs and real estate operating companies, representing just under 20%. And the remaining group was kind of a broad base of different types of firms, including institutional investors, developers, and professional service firms, all active within the commercial real estate space. Now, when we look at the demographic of firms by full-time employees, we have about 1/3 of firms who have more than 600 employees in total. And it's important to note here that this is a global number, not just specific to real estate for those firms that are part of a broader institution. We wanted to kind of understand that even if you are, for example, a 100-person real estate team, but part of a platform of 1,000 employees, that brings with it certain resources and additional corporate infrastructure that will impact the approach to DEI within an organization. So we had firms with less than 150 full-time employees in total, making up about 40% of this year's participation. And that remaining 28% are those that have about 150 to about 600 employees. And then lastly, in terms of AUM, you can again see a diverse picture ranging from less than 3 billion in AUM up through more than 30 billion in AUM. So there's really a broad cross-section in terms of the types of firms that were included in the survey. And obviously size will have nuances in terms of how it impacts your ability and the types of programs, budgets, and resources that may be available for your DEI initiatives. So as we all know, DEI is a critical topic, one that is getting a lot of attention in the industry, with over half of the participating firms reporting they have a formal DEI program in place at their company today, which is up from 47% in 2021. So what do I mean by formal? A formal DEI program refers to a fully documented, holistic program that has been approved by a firm's senior leadership and adopted as a means of directing and ensuring accountability for the firm's DEI initiatives. We had an additional 42% of participants indicate that they have some DEI initiatives or some policies that have been enacted. And then of that total population, there were only about 5% that reported not having any type of DEI program or policy in place today. So I think it's again important to note that size can have a material impact here. So the larger firms are most likely to have a formal documented program in place. And then when you look at some of the smaller firms, those are the ones that were less likely to have the formal programs. And while it was only 5% in total that reported having no DEI programs or policies or initiatives, among the firms that have less than 50 employees, so the smallest size of firms, that number of not having any DEI programs in place kind of doubles to 11%. So just a couple interesting notes on this page I'd like to point out. First, this year's survey, we saw an increase in the percentage of organizations with formal DEI programs across all company sizes, with the largest increase at the organizations with 50 to 149 employees. We also found that organizations that have formal DEI programs in place tend to employ people of color at higher proportions than those firms that do not. And lastly, we know that a lot of firms that participate in this survey are global in nature or active in more than one geographic region. So we were interested to understand how they were approaching these DEI programs across the different regions of the world. And what we found out is that 42% indicated that they have adopted a global platform-wide policy and applied it uniformly across all countries, so not having any regional variation. There was another 37% that have that global platform, but allow for variations by the different regions or different countries, thereby acknowledging they are going to perhaps have different practices and approaches in the different parts of the world. And kind of the remainder have country by country or region by region specific DEI plans. So how are firms approaching DEI from an organizational perspective? We'll cover a couple of topics on this page, starting with capital. So does your firm have a dedicated DEI budget? What we found is that today, about 30% of firms have a dedicated DEI budget, which is highly variable. So there are some firms that have a US $60,000 budget, and then there are those with budgets of over $300,000, with the average spend per full-time employee being $225. Again, there's some correlation certainly to size, but also in terms of how much a priority DEI is within the organization. We had another about 55% that fund DEI initiatives from other areas of the business, oftentimes coming from that HR budget. And finally, 14% that do not have any specific DEI budgeting or funding. Now, in terms of decision-making with respect to DEI, you can see the chart in the middle here. We had a little over a quarter of firms represented that the DEI team or committee is taking that oversight for DEI initiatives or has that ultimate DEI decision-making authority. We have about a quarter that have tasked the C-suite or a specific individual in the C-suite outside that chief diversity officer with this responsibility, followed up by human resources and a dedicated senior level DEI employee or that chief diversity officer, kind of right around 12%. And now if we look on the right-hand side at the third chart on the page, in terms of dedicated resources today, about a quarter of firms reported that they have at least one employee who is solely dedicated to DEI initiatives, while 75% said they do not. This is similar to what our results said last year. Again, speaking about size of the company makes an impact. The larger the firm with 600 or more employees, AUM greater than 30 billion, they're more likely to have that dedicated DEI employee. And what we found is that of those firms with those employees solely dedicated to DEI, a majority of them, or about 85%, indicate that these employees are either at that senior or executive management level. So kind of on these next two slides, we'll discuss a number of different initiatives and policies around the different dimensions of DEI programs. I know in like the near term, the focus tends to be more around recruitment. We need to recruit more diverse people. We need to have a broader range of candidates in our hiring pool. But when you try and put together a holistic DEI program, it's not just about recruitment. But once you bring these individuals on, how do you retain them? How do you develop your people within your organization? How do you create that inclusive work culture? And how do you track performance and hold yourself accountable for those standards that you've set as an organization? So we'll walk you through some of the specific dimensions here and discuss the key takeaway and findings. But before we do that, just want to orient you with this page, as I know there's a lot going on. We essentially had three options for respondents that they were given for any specific item. And those were whether the initiative is currently being implemented, as you can see by the green. And the blue, it's that they plan to implement that initiative within the next 12 months. And the gray is that they have no plans to implement it. So this kind of gives you a sense in terms of the prevalence of the different types of practices being implemented across the industry. And with that, Deanna, I'll hand it over to you and let you walk us through this.
Thank you, Lindsay. Can everyone hear me okay? Okay, great. Thank you, terrific. For my portion of the presentation, I'm going to hone in on the policies, barriers, and more demographics data from the survey, provide some key takeaways, and there'll be something for everyone. So as Lindsay set us up, we can see in the darker green that this shows growth year over year. And what we want to talk about are the wins that we see within the recruitment policies. Ensuring hiring team has employees from underrepresented groups, reaching outside of the CRE to recruit talent, which is a very impactful policy that we're seeing in order to recruit more ethnically diverse talent, because people of color are only making up 30% of our industry. So the fact that we have organizations representing over 66% as this being a practice that they are doing shows a lot of growth. And then also ensuring the hiring teams include people from underrepresented groups. That's simply to just bring the diversity in. Easy, that's step one. Step two, the harder of the two, is the retention. And to still see growth year over year shows that we're trending in the right direction. Affiliating with professional associations focused on underrepresented group, that's taking an active interest in an area that may not necessarily reflect your demographic, but the demographic of the talent that we want to attract. Providing mentorship or formal sponsorship programs for advocacy for underrepresented groups. Sponsorship is something that we will definitely discuss today. It is a proven tool that will allow us to support the diverse and underrepresented talent that we're bringing in within our organizations. And then lastly, but not least at all, evaluating employees based on well-defined, predetermined data. Do your employees understand what it takes to win within the organization? Is it clear how they will be able to get promoted? These are all wins that we're seeing within our industry. So let's keep going. Next slide, Lindsay. So here we're focusing on training and development and also an inclusive culture. 95% of CRE respondents, regardless of their region or employee ranking, said that communicating the importance of DEI to their employees was important. That's almost everyone. And so with that comes another layer of effort. It's not just about communicating the importance of DEI when a tragedy hits the national news, but all the time. So let's take it back. Let's all go back 2.5 years. Who didn't have a visceral response or reaction when we all witnessed the murder of George Floyd? So it's very important to not get sleepy on this, because that is what started a lot of the trends, a lot of the new roles, a lot of the DEI practices and efforts that we're all seeing. So an opportunity for change that went beyond discrimination is what was necessary. And what we're seeing is that we are staying out in front of the momentum, with that green being higher year over year. Providing training for leaders is going to be extremely important beyond just wanting to create a mentorship or sponsorship program, because we want to ensure that our leaders are equipped to actually participate. And then for our inclusive culture and policies, prayer and meditation spaces, inclusive dress code requirements, holding events to celebrate and perform for specific groups. Let's use Juneteenth as an example. Another new practice that came into place over the past 2.5 years. How can we take that from just being a day off to being more of an applied practice? How do we actually create an inclusive act along with that, so that our employees don't feel as though it's just a box check? So personal practices, how people dress and look, how we get time off, we're seeing a 14% increase. And this is giving people space to be their authentic selves, which shows that we are catching up. So let's keep celebrating. Next slide. I love the wins. Now, we have barriers and obstacles. With anything, change does not come without hurdles. So, we break down the mountains into little hills. Obstacles to developing and to implementing DEI initiatives are low priority due to other initiatives, no connection at all with the DEI policies internally, budgetary issues, legal restraints. It's good to see, though, that the barriers faced by organizations have decreased year over year. So more organizations are starting to lean in, more organizations starting to tie this to business practice and not seeing it as much as an obstacle within their organization. And we're not just talking a small decrease. Last year, 68% experienced barriers, whereas this year or last year's survey, we're now under 50%. That's huge. Next slide, Lindsay. Now, as we move into the demographics for the next set of slides, this one particular will cover gender. And as we can see, the men are represented in the green, our women population is represented in the blue. And in every single category, we are seeing an increase. which puts us in alignment with what's happening, since right now, for the first time ever, 10% of the Fortune 500 companies are led by a woman CEO. With us also having an uptick in our gender representation and gender parity in our industry, it shows that we're aligned. So if you even take a smaller peak, going from executive management level, last year 80 to 20, this year we're moving up almost 75 to 25. So continuing to trend in the right direction. Next slide, Lindsay. Now, race and ethnicity. Not as progressive as what we're seeing at the gender level. And at the women level, we saw a lot of double-digit progress. On ethnicity, we're seeing modest single-digit movement in the hiring process. So there's definitely work to be done here. And now that I've shared, gender and race, I want to talk more about the hiring promotion trends so we can move forward. Actually, I'm sorry, Lindsay, back up one more time for me. One important note that I need to mention on race and ethnicity would be sponsorship and mentorship. And oftentimes we're asked the major difference between the two. And if I had to sum it up very easily, it would be influence. Mentors will answer questions, give prep. Sponsors will lead the way. And there's a huge highlight for sponsorship as it pertains to people of color. And something that we've gathered from Harvard Business Review that we also use with our clients is teaching them the ABCDs of sponsorship: amplify, boost, connect, and defend. So when it comes to sponsorship, amplifying is the sponsorship equivalent of self-promotion. Boosting is the sponsorship equivalent of self-awareness. Connecting is the sponsorship equivalent of impression management through association. And the connection and boosting are prevalent to being a core key sponsor. And lastly, defending. Defending is the sponsorship equivalent of justifying and making personal excuses to help change others' perception. This is huge in mitigating microaggressions. Sorry, question come through. No, it's not. This is huge in changing microaggressions and unconscious bias. So we can move forward now, Lindsay.
Yeah, no, we've got a couple of questions from the audience.
Sure.
We've got one from Vanetta. You can go ahead and unmute yourself.
Thank you very much. I was looking at the report, the written report, but I think Deanna just certainly sort of affirmed that in what she stated. But the mathematics seem to me a little bit off. I just want to make sure that I'm reading this correctly. So between 2021 and 2022, it states that women increased by about 4%, moving from 41% to 42.5%. And then on the demographics of people of color, it said that increased by 8%, moving from 29 about to 31.3%, but the math doesn't quite match up. Am I reading this correctly?
Are you referencing the gender or race and ethnicity, Vanetta?
I'm doing both, both the gender. On women, it said it increased by about 4%, moving from 41% to 42.5%, which is only a 1.5% increase. And that people of color increased by about 8%, moving from 29% to 31.3%. But the math, again, that's not an 8% increase. It's just about 2%. So what am I missing?
Lindsay?
Sorry, I was on mute. Yeah, so this is just looking at the overall population in terms of the data that was provided. It's not a 10%, it's out of that population. It's showing slight improvement year over year, not the 10% or the actual numbers represent here. It's more slight. We're not going to make that huge change right overnight. This is going to take time. It's just showing that in last year's survey, that entire population per se company overall we had basically a 60-40 split. We're making slight improvement this year. Not, 10% at that rate, but just small change.
I understand, but the math doesn't work, and we can probably respond offline, but
I can explain it to you in more detail. Happy to do so. Yep.
thank you.
Yeah,
It's the difference between a percentage point. You're looking at the percentage point increase, not the percentage increase. The math may well check out.
Right, I'm just looking at the numbers as represented.
So you're looking at the percentage point increase, 42.5 minus 40, which is different than the percentage increase.
Okay.
happy to connect further offline over here.
Yeah, happy to
Awesome.
explain that to you in more detail.
Awesome, that's great, thank you.
Are we taking more questions, Celeste? Or
There was one other question in terms of amplify, boost, and connect and defend. If you'd like to address that, or we could save them for the end, whatever you prefer, Deanna.
sure, I can take, what was the question?
So I just think that that's a really powerful statement that you made, Deanna, and I just wanted to know if it was on a slide, but it sounds like it's not. I wrote it down, so it's good.
It's not on the slide, but I definitely can connect with you after, Sarah, to discuss further.
Thank you.
No problem. And just to reiterate those, it was amplify, boost, connect, defend, the ABCDs of sponsorship.
Next slide, Deanna.
Yes, please. Okay, so now we're going to get into the promotion, departure, hiring trends, and we're going to pull out the senior level. We will show the breakdown at all the levels, but starting at the senior level. And just to kind of help with understanding of this chart, in order to increase the representation over time for any given group within an organizational level, we must look at its current rate of representation. So that's the top line. By comparison, the promotions and hires must be greater, and the proportion of departures must be lower. So that bottom row that says total departed in past year must be lower than the total promoted in order for us to truly see growth. Just to help one see this. So what you can see here and what we're pulling out is that we're losing women of color at twice the rate than we're hiring them. And for North American participants, we stated that almost 70% of firms set measurable goals to have and reach, a targeted percentage of their senior employees of underrepresented groups. Over 53% said greater diversity at the senior leadership level would be one of the most important outcomes of a successful DEI program. About 30% are using succession management plan for senior levels, and over half have no plans to implement such a policy. So this is not the most positive trend, of course, but it doesn't have to be detrimental if we catch it. So now that we can see, yes, we're doing a fantastic job of hiring. Yes, we're increasing our women representation in the industry. But if we continue with this trend, we will erase our efforts. So we know from the research that it's not always intentional. People leave because the dominant culture sometimes doesn't know that their practices are exclusive to the very talent that they want to keep. And again, I'll go back to the 2.5 years ago when there was a huge uptick in DEI awareness. It's starting to fall flat within organizations. We're seeing that class of 2020, that class of 2021, they're starting to decipher whether or not what they received was lip service or a true implementation of a strategy. There's many options, it's not all one, but I would say given that we have such strong data points and given that so many of our participants have stated the importance, it's good to take a look now to see what can be shifted. We can move forward, Lindsay. Now, this is giving a closer look at all of the levels within the organization, and you will find very similar trends, even outside of the senior level professionals. There's a story to be told for all people of color and women at every level. And over time, we hope to see more hires and more promotions of people of color and of women all through the levels within the organizations. I wanted to see if there were questions before we moved beyond this slide, because I'd like to move into some key takeaways and get to more questions.
Yeah, there is one question from Natalie. Natalie, if you want to unmute yourself, you can go ahead.
Hi, everyone. It's Natalie, and I just wanted to ask a question. I couldn't remember whether or not I got the percentage right, so it might be wrong. But one of the comments that were made earlier, and Lindsay, this was came from you, which was that the 42% of companies, they don't have any variation in how they're, implementing their DEI practices. And I didn't know whether or not those companies are global, because we're struggling with that right now, right? We have different definitions of DEI based on what is legally permissible in the US versus, our global practices. And it gets to the question I think that Nicole is even asking, right? In terms of the data that we're collecting, we can't even legally collect some information. So just on that base alone, we've had to have a variation in what we are collecting and how we're implementing our DEI practices globally. So I was really interested in how to read the results of that 42% that have no variation based on geographical location.
Yeah, so I think you're talking, Natalie, about, let me go back here. The 42% that established that global. So that's out of that 40% of participants who are active in more than one geographic region. So out of the 40% who are global in nature, right? About 42% of them have that platform wide where they apply all their DEI policies across the countries the same. 37% do it across all the countries, but might have some variations.
Mm-hmm.
And then the remaining do it by country or region by region.
And so from that, Lindsay, are we to interpret that to mean that they have a universal definition of diversity that they're using and a universal way of collecting data? Because I'm actually really interested to maybe, talk to some of those organizations, as we're trying our best right now to understand that and implement how we're thinking about how we're going to implement our DEI strategy more universally. But there are challenges, right, to global companies. So I'm really interested in that.
Exactly. And we don't do a deep dive into exactly how they collect their data and what they're doing. Just the fact that they are having that, I'm assuming, like one point of person, whether it's the HR at the corporate headquarters is kind of running the DEI practice across the company, or that chief diversity officer is running the initiatives and it's one systematic program, as opposed to maybe, someone here in the US is running one versus one in, Europe, Asia, that type of thing.
Okay, so they may have interpreted in terms of operationalizing it, right? But not necessarily having one set of policies across the board.
True. Yeah, you could say that. But again, we didn't dive down to specific what policies and that type of thing. You can always add for future iterations. As we mentioned,
No,
we're always open for more feedback and evolving.
And we have one more great question from Nicole.
Yeah, I guess I'm just wondering, like, from the survey perspective, like when do you move beyond just looking at race, ethnicity, and gender?
So that's a great. So I will say we do ask about what other dimensions of diversity, equity, inclusion are addressed in the participants' DEI programs. And I don't think I have it in front of me, but I think outside of obviously the majority of participants are doing that gender, race, and ethnicity, right? I think ones that are growing in popularity are sexual orientation, age, visible, non-visible disabilities. And then particularly in North America, we saw an increase in the number of firms kind of addressing mental health, neurodiversity, socioeconomic backgrounds, and religion, kind of compared to last year. So we're seeing a little bit of improvement, not enough to obviously cut the data or really gather much information outside of companies starting to track and collect that data and address it in their program.
I guess I'm sort of questioning the push-pull of it all. So it's you don't feel that data is available enough to be collected yet from the members? Is that the way your lens?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and Nicole, just to add, in terms of obviously the survey data collection, we are really led by what you collect. One of the really interesting things that we were able to do this year was obviously to collect non-binary information for the first time. They were obviously small figures, I think at best we had like 0.6% for certain job functions, seniorities. However, we're following also your lead as to where are you collecting the data? Where can we get that breakdown of information so that it is really valuable and you can dig into it? We need, obviously, from a methodology point of view, you need a weight of data, a volume of data to be able to then to show kind of some breakdowns. But we do address the dimensions of diversity. Age is number one, obviously gender, ethnicity. But I do think it'll be really interesting to see, especially in North America, where else are you collecting? Where can you push that information? And we will keep a really close eye on that, because I do think all these conversations are superb. LGBTQ, sexual orientation, mental health, also socioeconomic backgrounds. Where are you looking and where are you getting information, and how are you collecting that information? What are the metrics you use? Because as you move further away from gender and ethnicity, which have very clear definitions, we use the census, we know those definitions. You get into more qualitative analysis to how you collect it. Is it apples for apples? So, but we're happy to follow your lead. So
yeah, no, and I'll take that on board. It's something that I am pushing for in my organization. I think there is sometimes I wonder what the push-pull of it all is, in terms of, if we start asking in these types of surveys, does that prompt more companies to start to measure it? You know what I mean? Like, it's very a chicken and the egg. I agree. So I just was curious to hear your perspective.
Well, say that's one place where we can actually bring Natalie Carey from Prologis. She used to be at NAREIT and obviously is now at Prologis doing the DEI work, and they did some amazing work on their DEI survey as well. So Natalie, if you wanted to comment about, that push-pull, who leads, that would be superb. We'd love to get your perspective.
Zoe, just on that, I think that I was literally texting Nicole on the side, because she and I were colleagues before, and I was saying that is one of the big troubles that we're having right now. We're looking at what some of our other colleagues are doing, and really trying to make sure that we're collecting data so that we can take action, right? There's one for the data collection mechanism, but there's also, how do we address systemic failures or systemic issues if we're not actually collecting data on the space of individuals? And the LGBTQ plus is one of those areas where, again, we have different definitions, whether in the US versus globally. There are legal considerations that we have to take into play. And then the adoption rate, when you do start collecting that data, tends to be very low for our organization. So overall, it's something that we are highly focused on. And I'm happy to kind of talk about what our approach is going to be offline, but we're working to address that very specifically, and making DEI beyond the Black, white, gender, ethnicity. We need to think about it holistically, but then also, how do we focus on the areas that we need to make sure are we're increasing the representation and the retention across our organization. So happy to share any information with anyone offline.
Natalie, you brought up a good point. It poses me to ask, I'd love to ask the participants, where are you collecting new data sources? Who's cutting edge? Any edge cutters out there?
And maybe that's something people can take back and we can revisit at the end of the presentation.
Yeah. I
shall
would
we
love to
pass-
hear from Ivy though. Ivy, are you here?
Yes.
Are you all collecting any new data sources?
Nope, we're not.
No, okay.
We're sticking to the, the same probably sources as most people in the US, EOC, et cetera, data.
Okay. I mean, at this point of the presentation, we can see there's data on data on data. And we're probably all trying to understand now what, like what's next. We see that there's been some progress. There's been some areas of opportunities that have been highlighted. But having a powerful data tool like this and doing nothing at all can actually do more hurt than harm. So where do we start? And I think it's important that we start with reinforcing that DEI is a thread through every aspect of your organizations, so that it's top of mind and that we're operating with intentionality. And then I encourage you to break down the D, the E, and the I. From a diversity standpoint, keep ensuring that you have a diverse pipeline of candidates prior to filling a role, expanding your network beyond the circle of the CRE industry. As best-in-class global leaders, we should continue to put ourselves in positions that will allow us to learn and grow and be uncomfortable and be more active in diverse organizations that we're affiliated with prior to needing to fill a role. So this allows us to have authentic connections with individuals and create a genuine relationship. Next, there's equity. Have equitable interview and promotion processes. Make sure that the candidates that you bring in have the opportunity to see themselves on the other side of the interview table and on their leadership team. If you see it, you can be it. And if you aren't there yet, share your journey to getting there. Share the importance of equity within your organization. Share the goals that you want to achieve. Because one of the worst things that we can do is act like the lack of diversity doesn't exist. So expand the conversation beyond the scope of what school they've attended or the zip codes. Lean into differences. And then lastly, inclusion. Create and maintain an inclusive culture so that your diverse employees who you've worked hard to recruit have the psychological safety to thrive. It's one thing, for example, to have a mothering room. It's another thing to ensure that your employees have the ability to use the mothering room, that their calendars aren't so stacked that they can't step away to pump. That's bringing it all the way home. That's more than just a box check, but shifting the culture that allows the safety to take those uses. And more importantly, where are you closing your deals? Are you closing them in inclusive places? And who are you bringing with you? Ensure that your clients and your colleagues see your diverse partnership and workforce. The diversity of thought is going to pay dividends and retention and our overall reputations. So I encourage you to just think about shifting your norms. And of course, seek help from your associations, guidance from organizations like Ferguson, who have thriving DEI practices, who can guide you along the journey. But I think this powerful tool should be served as a compass for us to keep going. I'll take some more questions, Celeste.
That's great. We've got a question here from Mira.
Oh, am I supposed to actually ask the question? I'm just wondering, in terms of categorizations, if you're looking at North America, it's extremely skewed to a US view in terms of categorization. And if you're looking at Asian, it's not really giving us all that much accurate data in terms of, what ethnicity and what type of Asian is it, considering 60% of the population in the world is Asian. Is there going to be a different type of split or view in terms of looking at data or collecting data? Yeah, so as I mentioned early on in the presentation, this is mostly North American data, heavily weighted towards US. We do collect data over in Asia Pacific and Europe. However, it's a much smaller percentage. No, I'm talking about Canadians actually
subclassify Asian further down just because it's, you know, a massive, I mean, Asia is huge. So to get a good viewpoint in terms of data collected on ethnicity, it's split out into South Asian or East Asian, and that's in Canada. I'm just, you know, basically just referring to the fact that it's a large amount of people that are not subcategorized. But if we're looking at the Indigenous population, I think maybe there was a couple of backslashes there that, you know, were a little bit more targeted.
Sure. So it all has to do with what the organizations collect on their end and then can report to us.
Okay.
So it's more so what information can you collect from your employees? There are some obviously legal restrictions outside the US. We hear a lot that we don't collect this information. And so we are only able to break down the information that you are able to collect and provide to us. So we are limited, and we do break it down as far as we possibly can. If you've had a chance to look at the full report, we have you know, breakdowns by the regions, the number of full-time employees, assets under management. In North America in particular, you can see more breakdowns, obviously, because we get more data. So the more data we can get, and the more data you can collect from your employees on any of the, you know, initiatives, the demographics, the dimensions of diversity, we can report that out. It's just at this point in time, we don't have that data to share with you.
Okay, thank you.
Deanna,
Sorry, go ahead, Ivy.
sorry, I just wanted to, now, Deanna, that I've had a little bit of time to think about your question, I actually just want to circle back on the data collection for a second, because I do see actually a lot of good comments in the chat as well around data collection. And I think ultimately it comes down to employees who are willing to self-identify. Yes. And you know, some folks have put in, you know, the trust and what the information will be used for. And we did do a Count Me In campaign where we did reach out to employees to ask them to self-identify on a few different categories. I don't think there was actually that much of an uptake on that. We did it in the US and I believe in London. I think because of that, you know, those concerns that employees have.
Thank you. I knew you had something.
It took me a minute.
We'll turn it over to Jessica. Jessica, you can go ahead.
Oh, hey there. Yeah, I was just something we've been talking about lately in our company is how do we collect LGBTQ plus data without, you know, overstepping the bounds of privacy. And I think it's probably all in the messaging to ensure that the data is going to be used for the right reasons, and people really trusting that, because people aren't going to share such private data, I don't think. And, you know, they want to know why, and they want to know that it's, you know, so that's kind of where we really want to collect it, but how to, and then, you know, I know the question was asked, I think you asked it, Deanna, is there anyone currently, you know, collecting it? Are they kind of collecting data that's, you know, above and beyond, you know, race, gender, et cetera? And I don't think anyone answered yet, but I'd be curious to know too. That's really it.
Thank you, Jessica.
Sure.
I see a hand.
Hi, I can share. This is Lindsay from Northwestern Mutual, and I can share just in response to that question. And we're captive, so part of a larger organization, but we do have a self-ID through our HRIS system through Workday for folks to select sexual orientation, and I think gender identity as well. So not to the points that have been made, not everyone is choosing to do it, but it is something that I think is at least starting to socialize that to the points that have been made, it's something that we care about, and you know, we want to understand what our population looks like so we can figure out other aspects to support folks.
Jessica, Lindsay, may I ask one question on that one? What disclosures are you giving around this? Because this goes to Jim's point in regard to the trust. You need to build the trust. How do you use the data? So what are you actually articulating on the use of that data and how you use it? Because I think that's a really important point. And then maybe Jim, you can jump in at this point after this as well.
Yeah, so we this was done through our employer resource groups or business resource groups. So the communication all came through those groups. So like for this particular demographic, we have a LGBTQ plus employer resource group, and they are the ones who handle the communications around this to the membership of their ERG to essentially say, hey, the company wants to understand our experience better. You don't have to do this, but this is a way that you can do this so that the company can start to understand what our population looks like, and then hopefully continue to improve our experience. So I think the fact that it went through the ERGs rather than coming like from management or from from HR, there is obviously HR involvement in the ERGs, but they're employee led. So I think that went a long way to making people feel like this is something that's happening a little bit more grassroots than like a top down. We're trying to, figure out who you are so we can do whatever with it.
It's such a great idea. And I'll let Celeste jump in, but I can see Vadim with his hand up as well. So maybe Vadim, you go fire away with your
So sorry, I ended up raising the hand. I asked a question, I think just before Jessica. Apologies if I wasn't sure if you needed to put it in chat or raise the hand. So a group, something that we've been working on here in New York out of the Torchlight organization is trying to encourage efforts to onboard a lot more women and minority and minority and disability owned service providers and vendors. This is something that's been key to our clients, also key to public pension plans, also a key, I believe a key goal of many Fortune 500 companies, some of which may be represented here. And really what we're noticing is that particularly in the asset manager space at the corporate level, for instance, your choice of accounting firms is one of 4, right? So how do you attract that professional services spend to minority and women-owned vendors if none of the 4 are that, right? And when I say one of 4 is because institutional investors, particularly public pension plans, need that public big 4 sort of public accounting firm stamp of approval. Okay, and then we're noticing that throughout even legal services, etc. So my question for the team here is, 1, how do we support women and minority owned businesses at the asset manager corporate level? What initiatives do we have to attract them as vendors? And also, how are you guys tracking this data? Because similar to some of the conversations that we're having regarding recording this data and getting it from employees and legal restrictions, right? We're noticing some of that on the vendor side as well. So, and again, I know we're kind of running up against the clock. Really open to having maybe a sidebar conversation, but very, very curious to know how you guys are doing this and how you're approaching this.
Such a great question, Vadim. Super. Does anyone want to answer that one? In the 60 seconds left. So.
I think it's more than a 60-second dialogue, Vadim, so I'm happy to connect offline to dig into that and give it the time that it deserves.
And Deanna, just to point out, Vadim, this is a major part of our MWBEs, or it's a major part of our DEIB strategic plan. So this is something that Prologis is addressing. I'm happy to share with you our approach to doing that as well.
That's great. Would be more than happy to hear. Yeah, and so I think maybe this could be one of those topics that we might want to do like a separate dedicated survey on. All right.
Absolutely. And just to stress, this is truly the crux of this survey, what REALPAC, what NCREIF, obviously NAREIM, PREA, NCREIF, and ULI are all doing. The reason why we're really trying to look at the whole of commercial real estate is to get the ecosystem view. it's going to take time. We absolutely realize that, but you are being asked about this as well with investors. This is going to start coming through more and more. So we need to understand, you know, if you're being asked questions on it, how do you benchmark? If we don't have an indication as to where does the industry stand on, you know, what is the representation of your architects, your law firms, your service providers, and that. So this is where we want to get to. It's obviously, it's a work in progress. So we'd love all thoughts, ideas, and how do you track it? So then we can track it and help you in the process. So.
Great, thank you.
Okay, well, thank you. On that note, Zoe, and everyone, because we're at time now. A big thank you to Deanna, Lindsay, and the entire Ferguson Partner team. We're looking forward to the 2023 survey and to moving the needle forward in regard to DEI in the entire commercial real estate space. Thank you to all the companies that submitted data. And thank you in advance to those organizations who are planning to participate in 2023, to everyone behind the scenes that made this webinar happen, and to everyone who took the time to join us today. So thanks very much and enjoy your day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.